All right, so today we are getting started on a lesson called Once Upon a Time. It is probably one of my most favorite lessons to teach. So I'm really excited to finally get to share it with you all after knowing you for a few years. I think y'all are ready for it, and I'm excited that you all get to spend some time working on it. All right, so obviously from the title of the lesson, Once Upon a Time, you can jump into this idea of storytelling. Um, when we're looking at these photographs, you can see, there's different ways of interpreting them, right? So there's very obvious references. So when you look at something, you can see something that seems somewhat obvious, and it allows us as individuals to make connections to fairy tales and myths and stories and things that have been passed down over our lifetime, right? That are part of our collective consciousness. So, like, if I know the story of Cinderella, I'd say there's a good chance that probably a lot of you all know the story of Cinderella as well. And I would say, even if we went to another country, there's a good chance that they would know the story of Cinderella as well. So, sort of these fables and fairy tales that we hear growing up. The other side of storytelling is that sometimes when you look at the photograph, it can be very open ended. Um, and you look at the photograph and it really makes you stop and wait. And before you can say anything, you in your head are going, what's going on here? What am I looking at? So the idea that a photograph can be a very obvious reference means that you will quickly catch on to what you're looking at. And then the fact that sometimes they're open-ended, um, yet can be very intentionally set up. And I'd say almost in all of these, they're very intentionally set up. It leads to an investigation by you, the viewer, right? You're the viewer. You get to look at these photos. And so the way that you, the photographer, set up the scene interprets the way or defines the way that the viewer is going to react to the work that they're looking at. And so this is a big lesson for you all, right? How do you tell a story through the work that you make? How do you make it so that, it kind of pulls someone a little bit and makes them think twice about what they're looking at? All right, so thinking about storytelling through photography, right? We could argue that almost every photograph that you see is some sort of story. The classic quote, a moment captured in time. I like to capture a moment in time. That, that's telling a story, capturing a moment in time. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at tableau or tableau vivant photography. So it's basically where the story that's being told is based on one specific image, right? So when we're looking at this, this is a very early example, but this is The Horse in Motion by Edward Muybridge. And so it's this, very exciting concept, right? It's almost like a flip book. So imagine when you were little, if you took a stack of, even if you took the corner of your spiral, and in each corner you draw a little figure, and the figure is like climbing up the page, a little stick figure, right? From one scene, it's slowly shifting to the next scene, which is slowly shifting to the next movement, until you have a sequence of events that are telling a story. So, for example, this is a silhouette of a horse in motion, right? The horse is beginning to run, and, you know, I'd say, it is cantering, right? All of the feet are off of the ground. So, as opposed to galloping, where some of the feet will be on the ground, maybe like this, where it's moving and the feet are on the ground. If it's going very fast, it's a canter, and those feet are all off the ground, right? It's like the horse is flying. And so this was kind of one of the forefront runners in someone making a tableau, so a sequence of images that tell one specific story. All right, Jeff Wall. Jeff Wall is going to be the first artist that we're talking about, uh, really specific to this lesson. And so he was born in 1946 in Canada. He was an art history graduate student. I think that's significant in the work that we're looking at. So he spent a lot of time not just, making work, but he spent a lot of time thinking about work and being critical of others' work. He uses digital manipulation, which we really haven't seen a lot of in the photography and the artists we look at. We've seen it with um, Andreas Gursky, right? He's the guy that has all of the really dramatic scenes with lots of different things going on, and he'll clone stamp. Um, he had the aerial view of the aerial view of the uh, grocery store with all of the vibrant colors, and there were just like 3 people there, but you can't really find them. So Jeff Wall will utilize digital manipulation. Um, a lot of the stories he tells are very casual stories. So it's not like, you know, some long-winded story. It's a very quick action that occurs, and then he remembers those quick actions and he photographs them. So it can be from a memory, something that occurred once in his lifetime, like falling out of a tree and what that was like for him. And then he will take that story of the falling out of the tree and set that up, right? As someone is falling out of a tree, and kind of all the things that fall through your head as you're about to hit the ground. Um, so we're looking at this first photograph, and there's a lot of questions as to what are we witnessing, right? We can tell that it's at night. We can tell that there's a flash on the camera, right? We have this really dark shadow. We've got this light on the stop sign that's reflecting from that flash. We have someone that's turned around, kind of walking in one direction, and we have someone running in the opposite direction. Um, so it brings up lots of questions, right? This is a scene that we've probably all seen at some point in our life. As you're walking alone down the street and someone is running past you, what are the different thoughts that go through your head? Um, did these two have an interaction? Is he running away from someone? Is he going on a jog? Well, he doesn't look like he's wearing clothes like he's going on a jog. So, all of these questions lead to what is happening? Like, what am I seeing here? Um, Jeff Wall does an amazing job of doing that. And a lot of the work that you see, it's a lot of the question of what's happened, something has occurred, and how do I, as a bystander, look at it and decide what's happened. All right, here's another photograph. I love this. I think this is so cool. For some of you, you might recognize this photograph, but I will flip back over here. It's a very famous Japanese print, um, and he is using this historical piece of art, this print, to recreate a modern day comparison. um, in order to get things like, if we look at these trees right here and the way that they're leaning, and even this little hat that's flying away, right? We've got the little hat here that's maybe flown off of this person's head, and we've got the trees leaning that way. There's a lot of photo manipulation in this piece. So if you were to see it, my understanding is that there is a line that cuts through it. He will oftentimes display these with a light box, so there's light shining through. But when you see this, there's been a lot of careful attention to detail here. So we've got sort of this modern setting, right? We can see some buildings in the background, so that makes it a little bit different. You've got people dressed up, kind of in their suits and their coats, some more casual. You've got the person who has the folder, and everything, all the papers are flying out from the folder. So this is a sequence of photographs, right? This is not one large photograph that he took and staged all simultaneously. He took a photograph of this person probably, and then he went and focused on taking a photograph of this person, and then this one and this one to get the motion. And then he went in and somehow got these photographs of the paper flying in the wind. And I'm sure that that's using a lot of clone stamping and placing it in the location that you need it to be in. And this hat probably wasn't that high in the sky, and maybe someone threw it up and he photographed it and then he stamped it into the clouds here. But the idea is telling this story from a historical piece. The trees, did he find these trees here or did he find them somewhere else and then he placed them here? The nice thing about the photo manipulation is that we don't know and we can't tell. Lots of times photo manipulation is super easy to spot, so you want to be very, very careful when you use it. Some of the nice things about this are the form, right? We can see the turn in the page here. It's those small details that make it really interesting to the viewer. All right, Sam Taylor Wood, Sam Taylor Wood. She was born in 1967. She is British and she references historical art in the work that she creates. So we are looking at this piece on the left versus the photograph on the right. And there are different ways to interpret this. Down here, we almost get sort of like that tableau, right? We can see this story. What's happening here? There's a sequence of events happening here. We don't have that here. So we do have this a painting on the left, and it's very, very dramatic. The skin makes us wonder, like, is he alive? He looks very pale. He's slightly blue. Um, things look straight about when you're looking at it. So basically, she would take images that she had studied and she would recreate them. She would recreate them, not digitally, but with film. My understanding is that this was a painting of someone quickly after they had committed suicide. A very how do you say, like a very noble, a man coming from a very noble family that was kind of told, this is what you need to do in life. He was unhappy with that. And so as his last kind of way of looking at the world, he decided that with the most control that he had, this was, his next best action. When in turn, it just seems as though when you read about this person, he was just a very spoiled person and didn't really like the way that it seemed like his future needed to go. In the more modern version, we have this very interesting way of carrying the hand throughout the piece, the way that she's framed it. Um, this was just set up in her apartment in college. So like you can see the cords from the electrical outlets in the background. And in order to pick up and carry the colors, right, this yellow ochre here, she has a blanket just casually thrown across the sofa. So it's a modern day version of this. This person obviously did not really commit suicide, but is laid out kind of reenacting this painting. All right, another piece by Sam Taylor Wood. So this is a whole nother series that's very different from the rest. I actually had this hanging in my room at Stratford. I had cut it out of a magazine as a child and just didn't know who the artist was, but thought it was pretty neat. It reminds me of the shadow from Peter Pan and kind of the connection to the shadow. Lots of students will say, well, how do you do something like this? Well, with a chair, we can see that the leg is balanced on the ground somehow throughout the entirety of the time. Whether it's done with a magnet or strings, right? You can suspend things by string. And then you can go in and you can digitally manipulate it and remove those strings so that it looks like she's floating. There's no shadow of the chair, right? There's just the shadow of her. So thinking about where her body is positioned, where the light is positioned, is she suspended? What's holding her? Is a person holding her and they Photoshop the person out? Is she suspended by cables and then they Photoshop that out? These are all things to think about, but really the beauty of that contrast of that shadow. All right, Tom Hunter, he was born in 1965. He also is British and he uses historical paintings to create the work that he makes. So when we are looking at this specific piece, on the right is a story of a woman receiving a letter, and on the left it's a modern day version of that same woman receiving a letter. So we've got a kind of a beautiful setting here with all of the different cloths that are draped. And then when we look to the left, we have a woman with a baby, and she's holding this letter. You know, it doesn't look like the nicest place in the world. And the story goes that basically this photographer went and it was a time in London where there weren't many places like housing, which is still to this day, housing in London is very, very expensive, and it's hard for people to find places to live. And so you had this young mother that was a single mother with her baby. She's receiving a letter basically telling her that she needs to leave the space that she's living in order to live in London. She's living in an abandoned uh, building and is almost like a squatter in the building. So she's a homeless person just living in this place. She's, I guess, claimed this little room as hers with her baby. But this is the process of her. She's received the letter from the government saying, you need to leave. You can't live here. And then what happens next for her, right? So he's using this other painting as a starting point and how to photograph this scene here. All right, so here is a very famous painting, Girl with a Pearl Earring, by Vermeer. And so you all have probably seen this before. And if we go back here, this is the same artist. And so just for you to have a historical standpoint on this artist is the same as the painting on the right. So that's pretty neat. All right, here's another one. I love talking about this. You all have probably seen the original work that this is based off of, but it is one of my all-time favorite artists. Most of you all know that I also paint and draw alongside of photography. And so if we flip over here, we have Christina's World by Andrew Wyeth. And Wyeth lived up in the Northeast. He spent a lot of time in Maine and made these beautiful, beautiful paintings. And when you look at the work, I don't know, it's just very special. This is a painting of, quote, Christina's World. And so Christina was Andrew Wyeth's neighbor growing up. She was paralyzed from the waist down, and so she lived in this farmhouse. This was her world. She could not get out and travel. She couldn't walk. And so that's why she's sitting there. You kind of see her arms almost as if she's crawling back to the house, but this was her world. And so this is arguably, I'd say, Andrew Wyeth's most famous piece. It is hanging at the Museum of Modern Art. So I got to see it when I went with Kincaid to New York a couple of years ago. Very exciting. But this is a modern day Christina's World, right? It's literally, I mean, look at the elbows in comparison with these. It's the same color dress. Everything's very similar. We're in a field. You have this woman in the field, and then suddenly you have this very contemporary setting in comparison to this farmhouse, right? So, what does this mean? What could this be? You have this young woman. She's in the grass. We have the idea of what does Christina's world mean to Christina, right? A very limited life. But when we flip over here, is this a limited life? What is she thinking about? What does this mean? So be considerate of what are the connections that you could be making when you're interpreting this young woman in a more contemporary setting, looking out maybe at her life and her world. All right, Gregory Crewdson. He was born in 1962. He spends a lot of time photographing very, like, it almost feels otherworldly. Right, I have it written there. References to sci-fi films, fables, modern myths, and theater. So the work that he makes is very theatrical. He's currently teaching at Yale, and he teaches photography at Yale. So my friend that I've talked to you all about that went to Yale, she would post like Snapchats, and Gregory Crewdson was like sitting next to her in the Snapchat. So his work is very specific. When you see a piece of work by Gregory Crewdson, you know it's made by Gregory Crewdson, and it's got a look to it. His father was a therapist, and from what he has stated over the years, that he would spend time as a child. His dad was giving therapy on the bottom floor of his home. He would put his ear to the ground. He would listen to these therapy sessions, and so he kind of takes those memories that he's formed, the ones that he's learned about over the years, and creates work based on it. So when we look at the camera, he's shooting with an 8x10. I can tell because the back is bigger than a 4x5. A 4x5 would probably be about half the size. So this makes for very sharp, crisp details. And he would use this little cape that's in his hand to put over his head and look through the back of the camera. Now, we'll look at some of his work. So um, this is, I really enjoy talking about this work. Okay. So obviously I don't have you responding to me, but when we're looking at it, it's a question of like, who is this woman? Why is she floating in water? Why is there sunshine outside? What are the clues in the bedroom in the house surrounding her that we can kind of gather information from? And so like, what are some historical references that we can think of as well? If you all have read Hamlet, um, there's the character Ophelia in Hamlet, who is just so in love with Hamlet, but Hamlet just, sort of, I don't know, kind of flirts with her, but also thinks she's very annoying and isn't interested in her. And so Ophelia, in her last dying breath, um, drowns herself out of this love for Hamlet and this rejection of not being able to be with Hamlet. But we have this scene that's been created. We've got a house. If we look carefully, we obviously have a woman. She is floating in the water. We look at the stairs, right? There's frames of people on the stairs. We have this repetition of three. We have this repetition of line. So like boom, boom, boom. The stairs kind of recreate that boom, boom, boom. When we're looking at kind of the windows recreate that boom boom, right? You're moving up the stairs, and even the windows in the door recreate that like, I don't know, number of three, but also that kind of stair step happening there. When we look at this work, the water line has gone down, right? Like, you can see where the water came up to the chair, but the water has gone down here. You can see it here. You can see it on the stairs. Um, her slippers, like, she left her slippers. It's like she knew she was getting in the water. She didn't want to get her slippers wet, so she left them on the stairs. Seems like her robe was kind of thrown over on the side, and she just went into the water. And the rest is really up to us to decide what happened. um there's all of these questions like, who is she? She looks young. Where is her family? Why is she alone? Why is the water subsided? Why is the sun rising? Why is she floating so perfectly in the water? Why is the water black? When the last time I probably taught this was when Harvey hit. And so teaching this to my students at Stratford, which I don't know if you all knew, but Stratford, um, I'd say over 50% of our school, the students' houses flooded. And so this scene didn't seem too distant from reality to them. Their house looked like this. Their homes were ruined because of the flood. And so kind of adding this body into it, right? And then we've got, excuse me, sorry. We've got the question of it seems as though she's almost allowed this to happen to herself. So what's the problem here? So you have to start making those connections. Like, why would she abandon her slippers and then just like willingly kind of float into this water and then die? She's obviously been submerged in the water. We can assume she's dead because of the coloring of her skin. there's a lot of questions to be had here. So we'll go on to this next photograph. This is to give you an idea of how Gregory Crewdson shoots. He hires real actors. He doesn't work with people he personally knows. Um, this is a whole production, right? You've got diffusers here diffusing the light to create this brightness. It's raining outside. You've got all of this equipment here. To make one photograph, my understanding is that it can be like it can be $1 million to make one Gregory Crewdson photograph. So just the set in and of itself and the crew that he hires to get these photographs taken, it's like putting on a show. My professor at UT went to Yale to get her master's, and she was an assistant to Gregory Crewdson, and that's sort of my background in understanding what a big deal these sets are. There's a story about the making of this photograph, and if you look at it, it's literally set up on a stage. This is not a real house. All of this is kind of plastic black under here to hold the water in, but just a really interesting way of setting a scene and then creating a photograph. So you have that sort of like sci-fi feeling, right? We've got this really dramatic light that's coming down these suburban homes, the repetition of the light. He'll utilize like spotlights and light coming from street lamps and different things to make things feel very dramatic and otherworldly. All right, Thomas Demand. I believe he studied under the Beckers as well. He was born in 1964. So he starts with interiors. So he's inspired by the interiors that he sees in the world that lots of people are familiar with. And then he builds small scale models of those out of paper. So when we're looking at something like this, right, maybe to you all this isn't as familiar, but when I was little, you could go to like Kinko's if you need to make photocopies and you couldn't just go make them at your office or at your school. And so you'd go to Kinko's to make your photocopies. This is all made out of paper. So just really think about that. Like everything you see here is a small scale model made out of paper. But this would be referencing like a Kinko's place. And then this has something to do with like a photography panel, like an annual photography panel. And evidently this is what the background looks like. So he's got like the water cups and he's got the little tents where the person's name would be. But this is all made from paper. When you look at his work, you'll see some other things too. Okay, Anne Hardy, she was born in 1970. She is also British. She photographs abandoned interiors. So they can be like places that have been, left behind by people or discarded objects on like city streets. And sometimes they feel a little unsettling when you look at the image. They can make you feel a little uncomfortable. She's also been inspired by different books that she's read, and she's created scenes based on some of those books. Right? So we've got the question of like, what the heck is going on here? You've got all of these cables at the top. You've got lights. You've got, for those of you that don't know, this is a chicken coop, right? The chicken would walk up here and go live in here. So is this a chicken's house? But why are there wires everywhere? There's a million light bulbs. So just kind of this strange things that some people do. She will somehow find them and photograph them. Here's another spot. This looks like a storage unit, and someone has taken the trees and shoved all of the trees into this storage unit. So kind of those abandoned, objects on the side of the road, kind of created into some sort of like sculptural element. All right, so you are going to be making a story. You're going to be making it with 10 photographs. How you want to tell that story is up to you. So things to think about. What do you want your story to be? How can you translate it clearly through the photographs that you're taking? What will your backdrop be? Will you reference books that you're familiar with? So are there some books that you've been reading where they very vividly tell you about a scene that you want to recreate? You are more than welcome to use that as inspiration. What's the first thing that you imagine your photograph to look like? Don't be afraid to do this. Sometimes you look at things and you're like, I just don't know how I could do something like this. Just try to use as much creativity as possible when you create your story. Um, I'm excited to see what you all come up with. It does not have to be a perfect sequence of events. You know, it can be fleeting moments. It can be an interpretation of someone's feelings and emotions. It can be any number of things. I will say that with the 10 photographs you turn in, if you would like to do two separate stories, you are more than welcome to do that. So 5 photographs could go for one story, and the other 5 could go to totally different stories. So it is up to you. What I will say is that this lesson takes a lot of planning. So you'll have some time to work on planning. I'm also going to have you all do the Pinterest 100 so that you can see what other artists are doing. So here are your artists for your research. Um, some of them are artists that we've already talked about. You can look up all of the different artists we've looked at, but these are the other artists for you to use for your Pinterest 100. Now, just like I have told you time and time again, all of these artists are artists that you could walk into any museum at any moment and see with your entire family. If you happen to go to their website and something makes you uncomfortable, please let me know. That way I can um, assess and then remove that artist so that we are not feeling uncomfortable by the work that you're seeing. Because they are contemporary and their work is ever changing. They're always updating their websites. So I'm really excited to see what you all come up with. This is going to eventually transition into your individual project. This does not mean that your individual project has to do anything with this storytelling, but this storytelling is going to kind of be the jumping off part for you to get started with the rest of the work that you make this semester. So I hope you all enjoyed it. There's a lot of artists to look at, and I really encourage you to look at the others for your Pinterest 100. You'll be sharing that Pinterest 100 with me as well.